Diane Taylor stepped out of the taxi on a warm Friday evening, smoothing down her elegant navy blue dress. At 65, the retired schoolteacher still carried herself with the grace and dignity that had earned her respect during her 35 years of teaching at Lincoln Elementary School. Tonight was special, her 65th birthday. Diane had decided to treat herself to dinner at Meridian, the upscale restaurant that had been making waves in downtown Atlanta for its exceptional cuisine. What made this evening even more meaningful was that her son Marcus had recently purchased the restaurant, though very few people knew about the change in ownership. "I'll just enjoy a quiet dinner before Marcus and the family join me for dessert," Diane thought to herself as she approached the restaurant's gleaming glass doors. Marcus Taylor had built a successful restaurant group over the past decade, turning struggling establishments into profitable ventures that celebrated diverse cuisines. 3 months ago, he had quietly acquired Meridian, deciding to keep his ownership under wraps during the transition period. He wanted the restaurant to maintain its reputation based on food quality and service, rather than through connection to his growing hospitality empire. "Mom deserves the best experience tonight," Marcus had told his wife earlier that day. "I've asked the manager Alicia to make sure everything goes perfectly, but she's the only one who knows about our connection. I want Mom to enjoy an authentic experience." As Diane entered Meridian, she took in the sophisticated atmosphere, soft jazz playing in the background, the warm glow from crystal chandeliers, and the quiet hum of conversation from well-dressed diners. The restaurant featured large windows overlooking the city skyline, elegant white tablecloths, and modern artwork on deep burgundy walls. The young hostess at the front desk looked up as Diane approached. For a brief moment, something flickered across the hostess's face, hesitation, perhaps uncertainty, before her professional smile returned. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" the hostess asked, her eyes scanning the booking system. "Yes, reservation for Taylor at 7 o'clock, Diane replied warmly. The hostess glanced at the screen again, then back at Diane. "Taylor, yes, I see it, dear. Please follow me." Diane noticed several empty tables by the window as they walked through the restaurant, tables with reserved signs despite being empty during prime dinner hours. To her surprise, the hostess led her to a table near the swinging kitchen doors, in the back corner of the restaurant far from the impressive city views. "Would this be suitable?" the hostess asked, already placing the menu on the table. Diane paused, looking around once more at the better-positioned empty tables. She considered saying something but decided against making a fuss. This was her special night, and she wouldn't let a poor table assignment dampen her spirits. "This will be fine, thank you," she said, settling into her chair. As the hostess walked away, Diane opened the leather-bound menu and took a deep breath. She was looking forward to trying the restaurant her son was so proud to have acquired. Little did she know that this birthday dinner would become memorable for reasons far different than celebration, and that her quiet evening would soon transform into something that would change the restaurant forever. Diane had just started reviewing the menu when a tall, slender waiter with sandy blonde hair approached her table. His name tag read Bradley, and while his posture was perfect, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good evening," he said, placing a glass of water on her table. His tone was noticeably curt. "My name is Bradley, and I'll be your server tonight." Diane smiled warmly. "Hello, Bradley. I was wondering if it might be possible to move to one of those window tables. Since I'm celebrating my birthday today, a nice view would be wonderful." Bradley's expression tightened slightly. "I'm sorry, but all those tables are reserved for our regular customers who made reservations weeks in advance. This is all we have available." As he spoke, Diane noticed a white couple enter the restaurant. The same hostess who had seated her immediately led them to one of the reserved window tables without checking any booking system. "I see," Diane said quietly, choosing not to point out what she had just witnessed. After decades of similar experiences, she had learned when to speak up and when it would only make her evening more uncomfortable. "Can I start you with something from the bar?" Bradley asked, his pen hovering over his notepad without making eye contact. "Just some hot tea for now, please. Earl Grey, if you have it." Bradley nodded and walked away without another word. Diane watched as he stopped at another table where 4 white businessmen sat. His demeanor transformed instantly, his posture relaxed, his smile genuine, and he even laughed at something one of the men said. 10 minutes passed before Bradley returned with her tea. By then, he had already taken orders from two other tables that had been seated after her. "Are you ready to order?" he asked, his tone suggesting impatience, though Diane had been waiting for him all this time. "Yes," Diane said, maintaining her composure. "I'd like to start with the crab cakes, and then the roasted duck with cherry sauce for my main course." Bradley raised an eyebrow. "The duck is quite expensive. Perhaps the chicken would be more suitable." The implication in his tone was clear. He was making assumptions about what she could afford. Diane felt a flash of indignation but kept her voice steady. "I'm quite set on the duck, thank you. It comes highly recommended." Bradley scribbled the order down with obvious reluctance. "And to drink?" "I'll have a glass of the Pinot Noir." "ID, please," Bradley said immediately. Diane, at 65 with silver hair, couldn't help but laugh softly. "I'm flattered, but I think we both know I'm well over 21. Bradley's face remained stern. "It's restaurant policy. We card everyone." Throughout the restaurant, Diane could see several other customers with wine glasses, none of whom appeared to have been asked for identification. She opened her purse and handed him her driver's license, maintaining her dignity even as humiliation burned in her chest. Bradley barely glanced at it before handing it back. "I'll put your order in," he said, walking away without another word. As Diane sat alone, she watched Bradley's interactions with the other diners. He checked on each table frequently, refilled water glasses promptly, and engaged in friendly conversation, services he had not extended to her. By the time her appetizer arrived, noticeably later than those who had ordered after her, Diane realized this evening would be a test of her patience. Yet despite the obvious differential treatment, she held her head high. She hadn't spent decades as an educator in the South without developing resilience. Little did Bradley know, his assumptions about this elegant older black woman would soon be his undoing. When Diane's crab cakes finally arrived, they were barely warm. She noticed that other tables received their appetizers steaming hot, with Bradley presenting them with flourish and detailed descriptions of the ingredients. For Diane, he simply placed the plate down and walked away without a word. "Excuse me," Diane called as Bradley turned to leave. "Could I have some extra napkins, please?" "Sure," he replied without looking back. 15 minutes passed and the napkins never arrived. Throughout her appetizer course, Diane observed Bradley's attentive service to the surrounding tables. He checked on their meals, refilled their drinks, and responded quickly to their requests. Meanwhile, her water glass remained empty, and she had to wave her hand 3 times before catching his attention to order a second tea. "I'll get to it when I can," he said, clearly irritated by her request. An older white couple seated after Diane received their main courses before her appetizer plates were even cleared. When she politely reminded Bradley about her empty plate, he sighed audibly before removing it. "Your duck will be out shortly," he said dismissively. "The kitchen is backed up." Diane nodded politely, though she could clearly see other diners who had arrived after her already enjoying their main courses. She thought about her son Marcus, who had always told her to speak up when treated unfairly. But tonight was special. She didn't want to create a scene on her birthday. She would share her experience with Marcus later, calmly and factually, as she had taught her students to handle difficult situations. When her duck finally arrived, Bradley practically dropped the plate on her table. The presentation was nothing like the carefully arranged dishes she observed being served to other guests. "Is everything okay with your meal?" asked a different server who was passing by and noticed Diane examining her food. "Is name tag grade James?" "The duck seems a bit overdone," Diane replied honestly, poking at the dry meat. James looked concerned. "Let me get Bradley for you." When Bradley returned, his expression was one of barely concealed annoyance. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "The duck is overcooked," Diane explained calmly. "It's quite dry." Bradley took the plate without apology. "I'll tell the kitchen, but they're very busy tonight. It might be a while before they can prepare another one." "That's fine. I can wait," Diane said, maintaining her composure. Nearly 30 minutes passed before her replacement meal arrived. This time, the duck was cooked properly, but Bradley had forgotten the side of seasonal vegetables that was supposed to accompany it according to the menu. "My vegetables seem to be missing," Diane pointed out when Bradley returned to check on a nearby table. "Oh," he said, looking at her plate with disinterest. "I'll check on that." Another 15 minutes passed. Diane had nearly finished her duck when Bradley finally brought the vegetables. "Sorry for the delay," he said insincerely. "Will there be anything else?" "No, thank you," Diane replied. She decided against mentioning that the vegetables were now pointless as she had finished her meal. As she ate, Diane noticed a white family at a nearby table complaining about their steaks being slightly undercooked. Bradley immediately apologized profusely, offered them complimentary desserts, and personally rushed their plates back to the kitchen for immediate replacement. The contrast in service was unmistakable, but Diane remained dignified. Throughout her career as an educator in a predominantly white school, she had developed a thick skin against such treatment. Tonight was her birthday celebration, and soon Marcus would arrive. She looked forward to seeing her son, unaware that the evening's most uncomfortable moment was yet to come. By the time Diane finished her meal, she had spent nearly 2 hours being systematically ignored and disrespected. She checked her watch. Marcus would be arriving soon for dessert. She decided to order something sweet to go, planning to share it with him when he arrived. After finishing the last bite of her duck, Diane checked her watch again. Marcus had texted that he was running about 15 minutes late due to unexpected traffic. She decided to order dessert while waiting for him to arrive. When Bradley finally returned to her table, Diane smiled politely. "I'd like to order the chocolate lava cake to go, please. My son will be joining me shortly, and we'll share it." Bradley scribbled the order without comment and disappeared into the kitchen. While waiting, Diane noticed her purse had slipped from her lap onto the floor. As she leaned down to retrieve it, she also decided this would be a good moment to visit the restroom before Marcus arrived. Diane stood up, purse in hand, and began walking toward the sign indicating restrooms at the back of the restaurant. She had taken only a few steps when Bradley emerged from the kitchen, immediately spotting her movement. "Excuse me," he called out loudly, his voice cutting through the restaurant's gentle murmur. "Ma'am, you need to return to your table." Diane turned, surprised by the volume and sharpness of his voice. Several nearby diners looked up from their meals, their conversations halting. "I'm just going to the restroom," she explained calmly, gesturing toward the back of the restaurant. Bradley rushed toward her, positioning himself between Diane and the exit. "With your purse?" he questioned accusingly. "It looks like you're trying to leave without paying your bill." Diane's eyes widened in shock. "I would never do such a thing," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the public accusation. "I'm simply using the restroom while waiting for my son to arrive." Bradley crossed his arms. "That's what they all say. You ordered that expensive duck, and now you're trying to skip out on the bill." By now, the entire section of the restaurant had fallen silent. All eyes were on Diane, an elegant older black woman being loudly accused of theft by a young white waiter. The humiliation burned through her like fire, yet decades of experience dealing with such situations helped her maintain her composure. "Young man," Diane said firmly, drawing herself up to her full height, "I am a retired school teacher who has never stolen anything in my life. I ordered dessert to go because my son is joining me shortly. As I explained to you, I was simply going to use the restroom." "A likely story," Bradley replied, his voice dripping with disbelief. "If your son is really coming, why would you need to take your purse to the bathroom? You were clearly heading for the door." A few tables away, an older white woman whispered loudly to her companion, "You can never be too careful these days." Diane's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I always keep my purse with me. Any woman would tell you the same." "Well, we've had people dine and dash before," Bradley announced to the now captive audience of diners. "I'm going to need you to return to your table until you've settled your bill. Then you can use the restroom if you still need to." The public shaming was almost unbearable. Diane had experienced discrimination throughout her life, but rarely so blatant and never so publicly humiliating. Some diners looked away uncomfortably, while others stared openly at the unfolding scene. "I have no intention of leaving without paying," Diane stated clearly. "But I would like to speak to your manager immediately." "Oh, I'm sure you would," Bradley smirked. "Trust me, the manager will want to speak with you too. Wait right here while I get her." As Bradley walked away, Diane stood frozen in place, acutely aware of the judgmental and curious glances from other patrons. Her birthday celebration had turned into a nightmare of public accusation and racial profiling. She clutched her purse tightly, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. What Bradley didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the manager he was about to summon knew exactly who Diane Taylor was, and his world was about to be turned upside down. Diane stood motionless in the middle of the restaurant, feeling the weight of dozens of stares on her back. She had faced discrimination before, but never so publicly, never so humiliatingly. Still, she kept her shoulders straight and her head high, a habit formed through years of showing her students how to maintain dignity even in difficult situations. Bradley pushed through the kitchen doors, followed by a younger woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Alicia Gomes, the restaurant manager, walked with quick, purposeful steps. When she spotted Diane, her eyes widened in recognition, and her pace quickened even more. "Mrs. Taylor," Alicia exclaimed, hurrying past Bradley, who was still halfway through explaining the situation. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here to greet you when you arrived. Is everything all right?" Bradley stopped mid-sentence, confusion spreading across his face. "You know this customer?" Alicia turned to Bradley, her expression shifting from warm welcome to cold professionalism. "Bradley, Mrs. Taylor is not just any customer. She's—" "I'm waiting for my son to join me," Diane interjected smoothly, not wanting to reveal Marcus's connection to the restaurant just yet. "I was simply heading to the restroom when your waiter accused me of trying to leave without paying." Alicia's face paled. "He did what?" Bradley stepped forward, his certainty beginning to waver. She got up with her purse and was walking toward the exit. "I was just following protocol for potential dine and dash situations." "The restrooms are in that direction as well," Alicia pointed out, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Did you ask Mrs. Taylor where she was going before publicly accusing her?" "Well, no, but—" "And did you notice that Mrs. Taylor had just ordered dessert to go? Why would someone planning to leave without paying order something else first?" Bradley's face reddened. He glanced around, suddenly aware that the entire restaurant was watching this exchange. "I was just doing my job," he muttered. Alicia took a deep breath, turning back to Diane. "Mrs. Taylor, please accept my deepest apologies for this terrible misunderstanding. Your meal today is completely on the house, of course." Bradley's eyes widened further. The restaurant rarely offered free meals, even when mistakes were made. Who was this woman? "That's not necessary," Diane replied with quiet dignity. "I am perfectly capable of paying for my meal. What I would appreciate is being treated with the same respect shown to your other customers." Alicia nodded, visibly distressed. "Of course. Please, would you like to return to your table? Or would you prefer to use the restroom first? I can personally escort you if you'd like." "I can find my way, thank you," Diane said, walking past Bradley without a glance. As soon as Diane was out of earshot, Alicia pulled Bradley aside to a corner near the kitchen. Her whispered words came fast and furious. "Do you have any idea who that is?" she hissed. Bradley shrugged defensively. "Some lady who?" "That's Diane Taylor, Marcus Taylor's mother." The color drained from Bradley's face. "Marcus Taylor, the new owner?" "Yes, Bradley. You just publicly accused the owner's mother of trying to steal food from her son's restaurant," Alicia said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Mrs. Taylor is a respected retired educator who helped put her son through culinary school. And you just humiliated her in front of the entire restaurant on her birthday." Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to treat anyone that way, regardless of who they are," Alicia replied. "But the fact that you've been providing subpar service to Mrs. Taylor all evening, yes, I've been watching, shows a pattern that's completely unacceptable in this establishment." Bradley's hands began to shake. "Am I fired?" Alicia glanced toward the restrooms where Diane had disappeared. "That's not my decision to make anymore. Mr. Taylor will be arriving any minute. I suggest you use that time to think very carefully about how you've been conducting yourself." As Bradley stood frozen in place, the hostess approached Alicia with urgent news. "Ms. Gomes, Mr. Taylor just pulled up outside." The moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than expected. Marcus Taylor's tall figure cut an impressive silhouette as he entered Meridian. At 40 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built a restaurant empire from nothing. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, and his warm smile immediately put the hostess at ease as she greeted him. "Good evening, Mr. Taylor," she said, her voice slightly nervous after witnessing the earlier scene. "Your mother is here already." "Thank you, Sydney," Marcus replied, having made it a point to learn every employee's name since acquiring the restaurant. "Is everything going well tonight?" Before Sydney could answer, Alicia rushed forward, her usually composed demeanor noticeably rattled. "Mr. Taylor, I'm so sorry, but we've had an unfortunate incident involving your mother," she explained quietly. "I was just about to call you." Marcus's smile faded instantly. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's physically fine, but," Alicia hesitated, glancing around the dining room. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No need," came Diane's calm voice as she approached from the direction of the restrooms. "Hello, son." Marcus embraced his mother warmly, but pulled back with concern when he felt the tension in her shoulders. "Mom, what's wrong? You're shaking." Diane looked her son in the eyes. Though she had maintained her composure throughout the evening, now that Marcus was here, her emotions began to surface. "It's been an interesting dining experience," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Marcus turned to Alicia. "What happened?" Alicia took a deep breath. "One of our waiters, Bradley, accused your mother of attempting to leave without paying when she got up to use the restroom." Marcus's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "He did what?" "It wasn't just that," Diane added quietly. "From the moment I arrived, I was seated near the kitchen despite numerous empty tables by the windows. My food arrived cold, my requests were ignored, and Bradley suggested I order cheaper items when I selected the duck." With each word, Marcus's expression grew darker. "Where is this waiter now?" Alicia gestured toward Bradley, who stood near the kitchen doors looking pale and nervous. "Bradley," Marcus called, his voice controlled but firm. "Would you join us, please?" Bradley approached slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. "Sir, I didn't know who she was." Marcus raised his hand, cutting him off. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You didn't know who she was, so you felt entitled to treat her poorly." The restaurant had grown quiet again, diners sensing the tension in the air. "Let's sit down," Marcus suggested, guiding his mother toward her table. "Bradley, you'll join us." It wasn't a request. Bradley followed them, visibly trembling. As they sat, Marcus looked directly at Bradley. "I'd like you to explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to accuse my mother of theft." Bradley swallowed hard. "Sir, we've had issues with people dining and dashing." "Had my mother given any indication she was planning to leave without paying?" Marcus interrupted. "Well, she got up with her purse." "To use the restroom," Diane clarified. "After ordering dessert to go." Bradley's eyes darted between them. "I misunderstood the situation." "This wasn't just a misunderstanding," Marcus said firmly. "According to my mother, you've provided substandard service all evening. Was that also a misunderstanding?" Bradley's silence was answer enough. "I want you to understand something," Marcus continued, leaning forward. "Before I purchased this restaurant, I was a boy who grew up watching my mother face exactly this kind of treatment. She put herself through college, became a teacher, and sacrificed everything to help me achieve my dreams." Diane reached out and placed her hand on her son's arm, a gesture that spoke volumes about the strength of their relationship. "The woman you profiled, dismissed, and publicly humiliated tonight is the reason I'm able to own this restaurant today," Marcus concluded, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Bradley looked down at the table, unable to meet either of their eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. What happened next would surprise everyone in the restaurant, Bradley most of all. The silence at the table stretched uncomfortably as Bradley stared at his hands, waiting for Marcus to fire him on the spot. Around them, other diners pretended not to watch while stealing glances at the tense scene. "Look at me, Bradley," Marcus finally said, his voice firm but not unkind. Bradley slowly raised his eyes, his face flushed with shame and fear. "The easy thing for me to do right now would be to fire you," Marcus stated plainly. "It would make a statement to the rest of the staff. It would satisfy my anger at how you treated my mother. And frankly, it would probably make me feel better, at least temporarily." Bradley nodded slightly, already reaching to remove his name tag. "But that's not what we're going to do," Marcus continued, surprising everyone at the table. Diane turned to her son with a questioning look. Mom taught English for 35 years in schools where many of her students came from backgrounds that taught them harmful biases, Marcus explained. She could have just failed them when those biases showed up in their behavior or writing. Instead, she educated them. Diane's expression softened as she remembered countless classroom discussions where she had challenged her students to examine their assumptions. Bradley, I'm not going to fire you today, Marcus announced, causing the waiter's head to snap up in shock. Instead, I'm going to offer you a choice. Bradley waited, hardly daring to breathe. Option 1. You can walk out that door right now. No formal firing, no bad reference. You just leave and never come back. Bradley swallowed hard. Option 2, Marcus continued, is much harder. You stay, but under a new probationary program I'm implementing right now. For the next 3 months, you'll work directly with our community outreach program, serving meals at homeless shelters where many of the clients are people of color. You'll undergo the comprehensive diversity training program I've established at my other restaurants, and you'll meet weekly with Alicia to discuss what you're learning. Bradley's eyes widened with each new requirement. Additionally, Marcus added, your tips during this probationary period will be donated to a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in the hospitality industry. Alicia, standing nearby, nodded in approval at the creative consequence. Why would you give me that chance? Bradley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was Diane who answered, because firing you solves nothing. You just take your biases to another restaurant, where you might treat someone else's mother the way you treated me. Marcus reached for his mother's hand. The question is, are you willing to learn from this mistake? Really learn, not just pretend to save your job. Bradley was silent for a long moment, genuine conflict playing across his face. Finally, he straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Diane. I never thought of myself as prejudiced, he admitted. But my actions tonight, there's no excuse. I can see that now. He turned to Marcus. I want option 2, if you're truly willing to give me that chance. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. Starting tomorrow, you'll work with Alicia to develop your improvement plan. Tonight, however, I think my mother deserves the birthday celebration she came here for, with proper service. Bradley immediately stood up. Of course. Would you like me to ask another server to take over your table? No, Diane said firmly. You started this evening with us, you should finish it. But this time, I expect the kind of service every customer deserves. Bradley nodded earnestly. Yes, ma'am, I'll bring fresh menus right away. As Bradley hurried off, Marcus turned to his mother. Are you sure about this, Mom? We could still let him go. Diane smiled sadly. In 35 years of teaching, I learned that sometimes the hardest students to reach end up learning the most important lessons. Besides, she added with a small smile, it's much harder for him to work here, knowing you're the owner, than to just walk away. Marcus laughed for the first time that evening. You always were the wiser one. As Bradley returned with menus and a genuinely apologetic demeanor, the other restaurant staff watched with interest. The evening's events had sent a clear message about the kind of establishment Meridian would be under its new ownership. Changes were coming, and they would reach far beyond one waiter's behavior. 6 months had passed since Diane Taylor's memorable birthday dinner at Meridian. The restaurant looked different now. Vibrant local artwork from diverse artists adorned the walls, replacing the generic paintings that had hung there before. The staff, too, had changed, now reflecting the rich cultural diversity of Atlanta itself. On a warm Tuesday evening, Diane returned to Meridian for the first time since that night. Marcus had invited her to see the changes he'd implemented, but he had an emergency at one of his other restaurants and couldn't join her. Stepping through the doors alone, Diane was greeted by Sydney, a hostess who remembered her immediately. Mrs. Taylor, it's wonderful to see you again, Sydney said warmly. We have your favorite table by the window ready for you. As Sydney led her through the restaurant, Diane noticed how different the atmosphere felt. Conversations flowed freely between tables where groups of varied backgrounds dined together. The music playing softly in the background represented artists from multiple cultural traditions. Your server will be with you shortly, Sydney said as she seated Diane at a prime table overlooking the city lights. Moments later, a familiar face approached. Bradley looked different. More confident, but also more humble somehow. He carried himself with a new awareness that showed in his eyes. "Good evening, Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice sincere. "It's good to see you again." Diane studied him carefully. "Hello, Bradley. I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "I've been hoping you would visit again," he admitted. "I wanted to thank you properly." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For what?" Bradley placed a glass of water on her table and straightened. "For giving me a chance to learn from my mistakes instead of just punishing me for them. Most people wouldn't have done that." Diane nodded, noticing how he made proper eye contact now, how his stance was respectful without being fearful. "The community outreach program changed my perspective," Bradley continued. "Working with people from all different backgrounds. It made me realize how many assumptions I was making without even knowing it." "That's good to hear," Diane said, opening her menu. "Your son's program wasn't easy," Bradley added with a small smile. "Those weekly meetings with Alicia were tough. She doesn't let anything slide." Diane chuckled. "That sounds like the manager my son described to me." As Bradley took her order, Diane observed how he interacted with all his tables, with equal attention, respect, and professionalism. The change was remarkable. Later, as she enjoyed her perfectly prepared meal, Alicia stopped by her table. "Mrs. Taylor, it's so wonderful to have you back," she said, sitting down briefly. "I wanted to tell you that the changes your son implemented after your visit have transformed this place." "I can see that," Diane replied, looking around appreciatively. "Bradley has become one of our most requested servers," Alicia continued. "And the scholarship fund that started with his tips has grown into something significant. We've already helped 3 students start culinary school." Diane's eyes widened with surprise. "Really? That's wonderful." "The local newspaper even featured our story last month," Alicia added. "They called it How One Night Changed a Restaurant." They didn't use names, of course, but they talked about how confronting bias with education rather than just punishment can sometimes lead to real change. As Alicia was called away to handle another matter, Bradley returned with Diane's dessert, the chocolate lava cake she hadn't gotten to enjoy on her birthday. "This one's on the house," he said with a genuine smile, "and not because you're the owner's mother, but because everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Diane nodded in acknowledgement, watching as Bradley moved on to greet a young black couple at a nearby table with the same warmth and attention he had shown to her. Outside the window, the Atlanta skyline glittered against the night sky. Inside Meridian, something more valuable than a restaurant had been built. A small corner of the world where people learned from their mistakes, where accountability led to growth, and where second chances were possible when accompanied by genuine change. As Diane savored her dessert, she thought of all her years in the classroom, teaching young minds to be better than the biases they inherited. Some lessons, she reflected, happen in unexpected places, and sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important transformations.